They came out the box. Everyone else was still having LSD hangovers.
When they were on form, nobody came close to that band.
We threw dopers out of his room, but he always managed to get it.
It's something that we would all pay for dearly later in life.
I said, baby, baby, it's all right.
Free were the ultimate blues rock band. They took a style of music and put their own unique stamp on it. Free defined the entire blues rock genre in the 70s. It's reckoned that somewhere in the world, every 20 seconds, a radio station will be playing this song.
Where she stood in the street, smiling from my head to her feet.
You know, you're at a period where Deep Purple were blasting it out. Yes, we're getting really complicated. There are all these classic bands from that period. They all sound really different, and Free's thing was tension and release.
And Free were so dynamic, Free were so singularly distinctive from what was happening at the time. I mean, there was still a hippie ideal, and Free stripped it all away.
You know, the whole sort of the Summer of Love thing was probably still in its full flow, but they were looking somewhere else for their inspiration. Their roots were sort of the blues, soul, R&B, and all you have to do is just listen to any Free album, so certainly the first couple, and you can hear how they managed to capture the sort of the essence of what inspired them.
In this country, if you go back further than that, and you go back to the days of the Animals and the Yardbirds and the Stones, the first R&B round, you know, in the John Mayalls, that was the first time. Then it came through the 60s and the beat and the psychedelic thing, and then we came back to it in a much more updated way, and then came Free.
In the beginning, Free were literally a pub rock band. They formed after a meeting and a rehearsal in the good old Nag's Head pub in Battersea in London.
I'd been playing with Paul Kossoff in a band called Black Cat Bones, a little blues band in London. And we were playing the old standards, you know, Rock Me Baby, Crossroads, Killing Floor and things like that. And it got a little bit boring after a few months, and we wanted to be in something a little bit more progressive. And Koss knew this singer, Paul Rodgers, from a band called Brown Sugar.
He actually suggested that I come and join Black Cat Bones, which was his current band, but I felt that if I was going to go and join another band and not start something new, I might as well stay where I was. You know, I was all for starting something brand new. And he said that Simon, he had a drummer in his band, Simon Kirke, was he pretty much felt was of like mind, you know, and so that was Free. So all we needed was a bass player.
Alexis Corner, who was a great British blues man, very sadly forgotten a lot about these days, but he was pivotal in many of the bands, you know, Stones and John Mayall's Blues Breakers. This was a man who was, you know, up there. But yeah, Alexis Corner suggested this guy called Andy Fraser. His crowning glory was that at 15, Andy Fraser had played bass with John Mayall's Blues Breakers.
15? He'd served 3 or 4 months with Mayall, and we said, well, he can't be that good. Alexis said, you wait till you see him. So we all went down to this club in London where Mayall was playing, and this kid, I mean, he didn't even look 15, he looked like 12, and he was just a fantastic player. A bit cocky, but you know, he said, well, I haven't got a gig after tonight, so we arranged to meet a few days down the road in this pub called the Nag's Head in Battersea, and we all got together and we had our first rehearsal.
And literally within hours, they knew they had something special. That they, you know, Rodgers had turned up with some songs that he'd written. They did a couple of standards, and then they started writing together. I mean, they started sort of there and then actually putting music together, the stuff that would appear on Tons of Sobs, the first Free album, and that is how Free got together.
Free would very soon burst out of the pubs and the clubs and become a legend, and it was no accident.
I think what stood out about Free was the whole combination. There wasn't one weak ingredient. every member meant something. Every member added a magic and an electricity. I mean, you had Paul Rodgers, perhaps the greatest rock and roll singer of all time.
Oh, Mr. Big, you better watch out.
I think Paul Rodgers is probably the greatest white singer ever. He sets the standard for a lot of other singers. He has such great range, tone, everything. He sort of sings from there.
But I've always thought of Paul as a soul singer, not a rock singer, and that voice, I don't know, it must be something in the water, because David Coverdale's close to it as well, you know, and they're both from that end of the country, so it must be something in the water up there.
Paul Kossoff's guitar work is what makes Free really special, really. It's his rhythm. I mean, I think, with the exception of Keith Richards, he's probably one of the finest rhythm and riff players that were around in those days. And he, you know, we listened to all the songs that he's done, you know, the Witching Wells and the I'm All Right Nows and all that. It's the way he combines rhythm with lead.
I would give Paul Kossoff the nickname of Slowhand above Eric Clapton, who in fact was a big fan of Paul Kossoff and asked Paul to show him how he did his vibrato. Paul Kossoff, in very few notes, could move you to tears.
He made his guitar cry. You know, in a different way. People always use that phrase with Jimi Hendrix. But Kossoff really did. This was absolutely everything, and you can hear that in his playing. He put absolutely every ounce of passion he had in his body into his guitar playing.
We knew we were good. We all knew that we were pretty good at what we did, but I didn't realise how good Kos was until he'd gone.
Simon Kirke, in the many times that I've met Simon, he said early on, when he was coming up, he was out there in a land filled with the likes of John Bonham and Ginger Baker and Keith Moon and Ian Pace and these astounding players with real technique, real chops. Simon realized that if he was going to do anything, that he couldn't go heads up with those guys. He was never going to do that. So he went the other way.
He plays soul music, basically. In his hotel rooms, he always played soul albums. I never heard him play any English band. I only ever heard him play black music from America. And I knew that me and him could communicate because me being from the Deep South, I also love soul music, proper soul music. And I think that's why me and him, keyboard and drum-wise, connected so well, because he knew where to lay the beat and I knew where to play inside and out of it.
Simon Kirke just lays it down. He's not a flash drummer. He's not an extravagant drummer. He's very straight, but straight in a really cool way.
Very solid, great drum patterns. Even right through to A Little Bit of Love, the later material, plays the most intricate drum pattern on there. But it sounds really simple. And Fraser is just unbelievable. I mean, I still tell bands who, you know, I meet now, are sort of fledgling bands, listen to Andy Fraser.
Very, very, very important part of Free's makeup, the engine of Free. And as I say, Andy Fraser, you know, 15 years old, playing for John Mayall's Blues Breakers. It's got to be something special there.
Musically, he was way ahead of his time. A phenomenal bass player, very unique. He left a lot of gaps, which complemented my playing. But his notation, his runs, and he wrote great songs. He played good piano, great drums. He was one of those child prodigies, but he was a little bastard sometimes, you know, a little know-it-all. And him and Rodgers clashed, you know, towards the end of our very short life. They split.
Tons of Sobs, the first Free album, had a less than auspicious introduction to the world. Slipping out almost unnoticed, sales were minimal, but the band had a unique style of delivery from the outset, which brought the fledgling outfit to the attention of the mighty BBC.
great song, fantastic. Kossoff solo between every verse, can't go wrong. When you listen to Tons of Sobs, you can hear that it's a band just finding its feet, that initial exuberance of, you know, you form a band and everybody's sounding good, everything sounds good, the songs are coming together. There's like a spark, an electricity from an early band, and Guy Stevens, bless him, was a maniac, but he knew how to catch a band in the studio, he knew how to get a vibe. Guy didn't know anything about recording, he didn't know what a fader was, he had no idea. Andy Johns did all that stuff. What Guy did was jump on the desk and go, yeah! When you did something he liked, and you know, he was literally trying to get a vibe.
I did think they managed to capture the vibe on the record. I mean, they managed to capture the band really well. I think that was down to very, very good knowledge of that, what they wanted themselves, and I think what they wanted was just a very live sound.
I mean, there is a tendency in rock music to throw everything and the kitchen sink into the mix, and sometimes that's right for the band concerned. But if you look at the music that Free were playing, you know, its roots were in the sort of the blues of America and the soul, the 60s sort of soul, that Stax, Motown, Atlantic kind of soul vibe, and the R&B artists as well. And it was kind of fusing the two and adding a bit more of a sort of standard British rock backing to it.
To me, Free is like a hard rock version of Booker T and the MGs. They were a band where there wasn't any waste to their music. Everything was carefully constructed and had such a power that it would knock you out.
We did standards, you know, Going Down Slow, and a couple of songs that were out and out blues songs, although they were Paul's, Walk in My Shadow, Moonshine. But you could see this little thing developing and growing, and by the second album, which was just called Free, Andy and Paul really had their own thing going.
Not only was Fraser a great writer, he was also an inspirational bass player. Songs of Yesterday provided Andy with the opportunity to showcase his unique bass style.
Sing me a sad song and I'll be right on my way. A sad song like the song of yesterday. Well, my father used to sing the blues. Sometimes it was good, but my mother never saw the use. She chased him.
I love the songs of Yesterday because it had two rhythms in it. Halfway through it breaks into this shuffle. It comes out of this fast 4/4, and goes, which is, I'd never seen it done before or since. It was a bit of a bugger trying to nail it some nights, to reel this thing in and change the beat.
I mean, it works brilliantly. It shouldn't. They go from, like, you know, a nice little groovy rock song into a shuffle, and then out, and they don't even blink.
It's like three songs rolled into one. It was fairly early on in the sort of their work. It just shows how, for young musicians, how clever they were to just switch from one groove to another. It wasn't easy to do, you know.
It's a perfect vehicle for the way that they would structure their songs. You've got Rodgers' emotive vocal approach, and then you've got the mixture of the sort of the riffs, and then the really sort of fluid soloing from Paul Kossoff.
It's like a lot of Free songs, they managed to combine the feeling of the song with the lyrics, and so that the match of the two is very, very good.
In contrast to the up-tempo swagger of Songs of Yesterday, the Free album also embraced the more traditional blues tempo, which adds menace to the sound of I'll Be Creeping.
It's got a lovely little melody line. And again, a lovely understated performance from Paul Rodgers. You know, I mean, because that guy could burst a lung, you know, hollering. but didn't all the time, you know, didn't need to. And this is a great example of you know, a powerful performance that is keeping it right down there.
It felt a little bit more like they were sort of experimenting a bit more avant-garde. I don't think it was, because I don't think they wanted to do it. I think they were. I always felt that Free were very well worked out songs, very well rehearsed, and they really knew what they're doing, even if they probably weren't. They always, either that or they were good buskers, but they always. So I think they were trying to just be a little bit less formularised, a little bit more sort of spontaneous, and I think that came across.
Once again, sales weren't spectacular, but the album made the UK charts, rising to number 22 following its release in October 1969. Now, so far, the growth of the band was down to hard work, playing small clubs and support slots anywhere and everywhere. A good solid grounding that can help bands to cope with the demands of fame. But for Free, fame would be so sudden and on such a massive scale that no amount of gigging could prepare them for what was about to happen.
It delivers on the promise of what the group was doing at the beginning of their career. You could sense, you could hear the confidence in the grooves. You could hear that this band was no longer just some young kids. They got a lot more seasoned in terms of playing live and really crafting their sound. And Fire and Water, to me, carries all the best Free songs.
I think Fire and Water and the album that came from is probably their finest moments, and always will be thought of their finest moments. It's a pinnacle in their career.
But there's one song on it which was covered by Wilson Pickett, Fire and Water. And I'm a soul man, and I heard his.
It's a brash rocker, it's raw, it's passionate, it's great guitar work from Kossoff. You know, you can just picture Rodgers stood there with a mic stand like that, just giving it. Great rocker, and you know, rightly regarded as one of the best songs Free ever wrote.
Fire and Water must have made you their daughter. You've got what it takes to make a poor man's heart break. And it's fantastic. You know, oh, wonderful. And the chord progression in that as well. It's just wonderful.
Your love is gone, baby, I got to leave you.
Another gem from the album was the slow, brooding blues of Mr. Big, which again showcased the extraordinary talents of Andy Fraser, who began to use the piece as the basis for an extended bass workout.
Mr. Big, what a superb song that is. What a superb song for strutting your stuff on the disco dance floor. That's what it is. It's a strutting song, and it's also a song about, oi, Mr. Big, stay away from my bird, otherwise I'll be digging a big deep hole for you. And that's the thing about Free, simple bloody story, said very easily, understood. You can understand it very easily. You can also hear the words, which is fantastic. And it's got that, you just got to strut your stuff.
I remember listening to that when I was a kid, and it sent shivers up my spine. And I listened to it the other day, and it sent shivers up my spine. It is just, it's got everything that Free were about. You know, the great rhythm, the bass line, the bass solo in it, which was different to any other bass solo because the band keep playing behind it.
Andy didn't just play anything, he was clever. He knew where to leave gaps. He knew where he could make something intense by not playing on the 4. You know, he'd be down here somewhere. Nobody played down there. It's ridiculous. You know, everybody else was here somewhere, but Andy was right up here, right up, no fear of going up the neck. He knew where everything was, but he could bend the notes. I mean, you listen to him bending notes in Mr. Big. Incredible stuff.
Free always had this thing where they laid down the rhythm in 4s half the time, and it just really kicked out without making it sound boring. It's strange. They had a very straight drum rhythm, and whatever they put on top made it really interesting. And you'd think, well, that's really straight. That doesn't do anything. But actually, that's the trick. Because Simon's was laid down such a solid bottom end, Andy Fraser could play round the bass drum and round the rhythm, and the guitars could more or less do what they wanted.
If you take away one of those pieces, the whole song falls apart. And it was just that great riff, and it's such a simple song. I mean, I think it's basically blues changes, you know, like a G, C, D, whatever key it's in. But it was a great song. And just somehow the image of Mr. Big just works for that. I don't know.
Fire and Water was to prove to be a pinnacle in the band's career. This was the album that contained the immortal All Right Now, one of the greatest rock songs of all time.
I remember secretary calling up from Island Records saying, you better get down here quick for a photo session because All Right Now went in at number 4. And this was the killer line for me. She said, we're sending a car. Hey. When the record company sends a car, you know you're doing all right.
Every wedding reception you go to, every party, every Christmas party, it's a guaranteed dance floor filler.
It's just one of those songs that it has the appearance of always being out there, and these guys just plucked it out of the air. It's kind of melody that, you know, you think, well, maybe you and I could have written that. You know, it's one of those things.
Massively clever guitar riff. Absolutely unbelievable guitar riff. Combined with a very, very simple lyric, melodically, which matched the guitar.
It moved, even though it's a repetitive song. It had a section that did this, a section that did that, a section that did that, and then the big bang. And so, yeah, that's obviously, in fact, it's probably one of those songs that's been played so much that you never want to hear it again.
Apparently the ASCA, the American Collection Society, just awarded it the all-time, you know, best plays, most plays in America.
You know, I mean, people say I'm sick and tired of hearing it All Right Now, but the thing is, you know, every time you hear it, you enjoy it. It's simple as that. It's a great song.
Classic rock radio in America plays songs like Stairway to Heaven and Freebird and All Right Now ad infinitum, but I'll tell you, I never get tired of hearing All Right Now.
Sunday, August the 30th, 1970, the Isle of Wight Festival, I believe. Melanie Donovan, the Moody Blues, Jethro Tull, Miles Davis and Jimi Hendrix all were on that same stage that Free played that day.
We went on in the morning, on Sunday morning, I think about midday, and the people were emerging from their sleeping bags, you know, a bit bleary-eyed, and there we were. It was a lovely sunny day. That was wonderful. And then we only heard later there was like 400,000 to 500,000 people out there. We would have dropped through the floor if we'd have known that.
The Isle of Wight performance was exceptional. I mean, I think they were peaking then. I think it was like they were really on song. They were one of those few bands that actually, when they did festivals, when they did big audience, you know, you got up of 10,000, 15,000, would still manage to make it feel quite personal, and you still got a very good, warm, bluesy feel to it. It didn't suddenly just become loads of noise and lots of echo and lots of drums and not quite the same.
So I remember getting on the ferry, coming over to the Isle of Wight, and this guy comes up, and we're going, fucking Pete Townsend, man. And he knocks on our window, and we wind down this transit window. He says, that's a great song of yours, you bastards, and walks off. And I went, Pete Townsend called us a bastard, man. Great.
All Right Now was a worldwide sensation. It hit the charts in just about every country in the world and catapulted the band to stellar status overnight. Concerts sold out instantly everywhere, and the scenes of chaos and hysteria were often compared to Beatlemania. There remained the distinct possibility that fame on this scale was just too much, too soon.
It became an albatross for us. I mean, I always enjoyed playing it, but it elevated us into the pop world. You know, it was a great pop song, a light-hearted, great dance song, dance record, whatever you want to call it, but it kind of thrust us into this world of fame.
Everyone was very young. They weren't as mature in terms of this life that was thrust on them. Stardom came really quick. No one was, you know, old and wizened. And, you know, there's, you know, sex, drugs, rock and roll, you know, can take down even the greatest and mightiest of rock bands.
Some people just have that character that they can take drugs and it doesn't affect them too much, and some people, you know, it really gets to them and it gets them in a bad way. And sadly, Paul Kossoff was one of those. I think it was Mandrax that he was taking, which were downers that he used to take by a handful. And then, of course, sadly, as his drug dependency grew, it became heroin.
Paul always had a problem anyway. I mean, he was doing speed at school. You know, he always had a kind of inroad into that. He knew more about that problem than the rest of the band did. They'd smoke a bit of weed and have a drink and that'd be about it. Paul knew more.
Everyone did it. Everyone still does it. You know, it comes with the territory, especially when you're in your early 20s and you're bulletproof. You know, that's what you do. It's something that we would all pay for dearly later in life, but back then it was great. Anything went, and it did. We were just kind of growing up, really. We'd only been together about 2 years, and it did knock us for a loop, especially when the follow-up record to All Right Now, which was called The Stealer, when that didn't do anything. That was a real blow for us.
Stealer should have been a massive hit. It is a great single. It's a great track, all about a guy going downtown, sees a lady, a foxy lady standing on the corner, merrily as can be, asks her if she'd like to go out with him because he's the stealer, come to steal her heart.
Actually, musically, The Stealer was probably musically a better song, but it just didn't even go near the commercial success of All Right Now, which would have devastated them being young guys.
The Stealer is probably the best single Free released. It sounds great, it's very well recorded, the production is excellent, but for some reason the public didn't agree. The band don't understand it, the record company don't understand it. Andy Johns definitely don't understand it, because Andy Johns thinks that's one of the best things he ever did.
Very catchy. It immediately locks into a sort of a groove, a rhythm that sort of builds, you know, the stealer, come to sort of prowls in a way, and that's the kind of, you know, that it's a good way of looking at how Free could instill into the song, you know, kind of exactly what they were trying to convey in the lyrics as well.
Fantastic vocal, unbelievable solo. I just had such a groove. That's the thing Free always invented for me. They had that sort of rock groove thing without people going, oh, they're going funky. They always managed to get a groove into the rock. So it really sort of made you sort of go, yeah, that sounds really cool. Without going down that funky route, you know, without being, we are funky rock. You know, they managed to put a groove into things that actually made it work without making it a bit too like that.
The lackluster commercial performance of the single was echoed in Highway, the band's fourth album, which was distinctly under par in terms of what Free could really do. One of the bright spots, however, was the optimistically cheerful Ride on Pony.
Baby, won't you tell me what you're trying to do? You don't need to say that our love is through, because I love you, yes I do, and I'm gonna see it through.
It's based on a real classic blues riff. Instead of trying to change it and, you know, muck about with it, they just use the song. And it's a great interpretation. It's just a brilliant interpretation, and they use it really well. You know, and being such great players, what they do with it enhances it.
It starts very simply with an absolutely killer, funky bass riff. And it's a gentle stroll, or it seems like you're having a gentle stroll, but I can assure you by the end of the track it feels like you've had a damn good workout. And it's, you know, the way it builds and then bang, back to the funky bass.
Quite dynamic as well. It was one of those songs where your verse would resolve with a very quiet little bridge section, and then the chorus would come belting out at you. They had a great habit of doing that. They could go very quiet and quiet to think, and then bang, chorus. So they had that lovely and great solo in there as well, you know, and Ride on Pony.
Despite the upbeat sentiments of Ride on a Pony, these were tough times for the band. Paul Kossoff's drug habit was worsening daily, and it looked as if the band would never capitalize on the big sales of All Right Now.
The irony is now, in the 21st century, that anyone who had a problem, or a tenth of the problem that Paul had, would be whisked off to rehab by the record company or his family before his feet could touch the ground. But back in those days, you had AA, and that's it. And to be an addict or an alcoholic was like, whoo, you know, you just didn't talk about it.
I remember the British press came down very heavily on Kossoff and gave him a very, very rough ride over his drugs. And you've got to remember at that time, the attitude to drugs was a fairly harsh one in this country. You know, if you were a druggie, you know, you were ostracised by quite a lot of people in this country. And it hurts me to think that people that would actually affect album sales, but I think eventually that did affect album sales, and a lot of people turned away from Free because of Kossoff's meaningless and sad demise into drug addiction.
And I don't know how to say this any other way, but his illness and stuff like that is probably the reason they didn't become megastars in America, because he wasn't strong enough to carry it on. That's my opinion, but I'm sure that otherwise, why wouldn't they have?
Despite the declining commercial success on vinyl, the rigorous touring schedule continued unabated until, finally, ground down by the sheer relentlessness of it all, Free decided to call it a day.
Free, at that point, should have had a better manager or better management from just somebody in the record company saying, all right, guys, you need to just take a break. You know, do this tour and take a month off. Because they'd never done it. And the schedule was getting punishing.
In those days, we did an album, a tour, an album, a tour. You know, nowadays it's much more pedantic, you know. It's like I do an album in 1 year and tour. I don't think it's anywhere near as fun as it used to be. But in those high-pressure days, it was one after the other. So by the end of 1970, when All Right Now had peaked, we'd really crammed in a whole lifetime of gigs and albums.
It was ironic that within days of the split, news came through that the band's final single, My Brother Jake, had entered the charts. Altogether lighter in tone and style, My Brother Jake demonstrated another changing facet of the band, the increasing use of keyboards supplied by the highly versatile Andy Fraser.
He goes out, he don't have no doubt. You don't have to know what the world's about. My brother Jake, head down, it's a scrape in the ground. Jake, stay awake. You can't always be down. He goes out.
Paul Rodgers wrote a blinding lyric, I mean absolute blinding lyric, which is a great little story as well. I mean, it's, you know, My Brother Jake. What a great line to think of, you know. All right now, what a great line. You know, they come up with these great one-liners. It's like a great comedian. One-liner, short, sharp and effective. Exactly the same as those songs. Brilliant one line, My Brother Jake. You know, you can even hear it. If I say that to you, you can hear the melody in your head. That's the trick. It was just the melody of the one line made it work. All right now, exactly the same.
A bit of an anomaly, My Brother Jake, I suppose, in the Free canon, just because it's more piano-led than anything else, and it's sort of lighter in tone and feel than a lot of their music, but it's quite spiritual in a way.
It's not really as jolly as the music portrays. In fact, again, that to me sounds like a personal plea from Paul Rodgers to Paul Kossoff. You know, please mate, give it up. Come back to the old Paul that we all knew and loved.
Free fragmented and went off on various other solo projects with indifferent success. Paul Rodgers formed his own band called Peace, Andy Fraser formed a band called Toby, while Kossoff and Kirke teamed up with Japanese bassist Tetsu and Texan keyboard wizard John Bundrick, better known to one and all as Rabbit.
Rebob called and said, Free have just split up. Chris Blackwell has heard your demos. He wants to know if you will come and play in a band with the drummer and the guitarist from Free and do a solo, do an album of just you guys. And I said, when? And he said, now. And I said, fantastic, because I'm coming to England anyway. So luckily, my first day in England, a meeting was set up for me to meet Simon Kirke and Paul Kossoff in a cafe over in Notting Hill Gate. We sat and had breakfast and talked, and we got on great. The two of them explained to me what the KKTR thing was about, what happened to Free, which at that time I didn't care, because if Free was still there, I wouldn't have been playing with Simon and Paul.
Oh, I love Rabbit. Koss adored him because he was, you know, we loved anything American. And, you know, Rabbit was from Texas, even though he was playing with Johnny Nash, this black pop singer in Sweden. That's where we first saw him. We were in a hotel and there he was, and it was like, I can see clearly now. It was like, oh yeah, and then this keyboard player, we were going, oh, he's great. And then he came out with this southern drawl. It was like, yeah man, I'm from just outside of Houston, you know, I love to play with y'all, and he was great. And then he played this organ and piano. Koss loved him because, you know, when we had Rabbit in the band, it gave Koss more of a freedom just to play lead. When it was just the four of us, Koss had to play rhythm and lead, and he got a little bit, it was a lot to ask, you know, when there's only one guitar and one bass. So when Rabbit joined, it just freed him up immensely.
It's like the initial spark again with Free. You've got Kossoff sparking off Rabbit, because Rabbit's playing things Kossoff's never heard, you know. Free never really used Hammond organ. And of course Rabbit wades in there with a Hammond organ, powering that up. And Kossoff must have been thinking, whoa, you know, fantastic, I can now solo, and there's somebody filling the bottom end in. You know, so it was all new, and again, that kind of transfers itself onto the Kossoff Kirke Tetsu Rabbit record. It was all new. It was now, you know, and it was an exciting period. Unfortunately, they couldn't find a singer. They asked Paul Rodgers, but Paul was doing peace. He got his own band. They were about to start recording. He got some songs. Peace was sounding pretty good. Why would he want to join Kossoff Kirke Tetsu Rabbit? So Simon and Rabbit sang. Neither of them liked their vocal performances particularly. I have no problem with them. As I say, I think KKTR is a stunning record, very adult record. You know, nothing to do with Free particularly. It doesn't sound like Free at all. It's far more mid-Atlantic because of Rabbit's influence, but a great record.
None of the 3 solo ventures were actually to set the world on fire. It was just as well that Island Records kept the flame flickering for Free with the release of Free Live, regarded by many as the band's best work in ages. It included a killer version of Be My Friend, which in happier times had been such a big hit for the band at the Isle of Wight Festival.
You know I worried, such a lie, and I would give all I got just to have someone believe, just to do that and put me back on evenly.
A wonderful example of you know, nobody doing too much, and everybody knowing their place within the song, and which is something that, you know, Free was so good at from the off. You know, it was, you listen to them and everything just sort of slots into place. You know, there isn't a drum fill too many. There isn't a bass note too many, and you know, the solo doesn't overdo it, and Rodgers doesn't overdo the vocals either. It's just a sort of, it captures that Free magic that they knew instinctively, you know, what to do and what not to do in any song they played.
The live version of that on the Free Live, I mean, the studio version is wonderful, but the Free Live version is just special. And it's just sort of, because they always had a habit when they played live of playing slightly slower than they did on the studio recordings, which is always nice. It always gives the band more room to work with.
Slower tempo, chance for more blues guitars, chance for more feel, just a different approach.
Alarmed by the rapid decline in Paul Kossoff, the band reformed in 1972. It seemed almost the only way to try and save the guitarist from himself.
Inactivity wasn't good for Paul Kossoff. At that point, he bought a house just off Portobello Road, and Portobello Road, Notting Hill Gate at that time was where all the drugs were, basically. Paul Kossoff was a famous musician, so there was no shortage of people who were quite happy to go into his house and to hang around with Paul Kossoff. They might have a few little goodies to give him, you know. And it was becoming desperate, you know. It got to the point where he wouldn't leave the house. And he started knocking all the sharp edges off of his life, really. And Mandrax was the numbing quantity, you know, in his life. And at some point, Andy approached Paul Rodgers and said, we need to do something about Paul Kossoff, because he's going to die. And Peace wasn't perhaps doing as well as Paul wanted it to. Toby wasn't doing as well as Andy wanted to. So Free was certainly better than what they had going then in a reformed version. So why not reform Free? And that's pretty much what happened.
The result was Free at last, released in June 1972, which provided an instant hit with the magical Little Bit of Love.
I believe if you give a little bit of love to those you live with, a little bit of love. Oh.
Little Bit of Love's perfect. I mean, that thing's, I think it's under 3 minutes. And a song that's often forgotten, great single, charted just. But it's 3 minutes of bliss. I mean, everything's there. You know, great intro, great verse, great chorus. Solo's really short, but perfectly formed. I mean, it's a perfect solo. There's not a note out of place, there's nothing missing, there's nothing needs adding, there's nothing you could take away from it. It's just rounded and soulful and perfect. Rodgers singing on top of all that, what a combination.
The album did very well. I think it got to number 9 in the UK charts. The single Little Bit of Love did very well. Re-established the band as Free. They were back. You know, we obviously knew they'd had problems, but they're back and they're rocking again. But even during the recording of that album, I believe that a lot of the problems that had split the band up were resurfacing, and I think one of those main problems was Paul Kossoff's drug addiction. And they had to actually tour the US in the summer of '72 on the back of Free at Last, and Kossoff was missing gigs right, left and centre.
And I remember going, just before we went on stage, at what was billed as one of our finest gigs, 5 minutes before going on stage, placing his left hand on his guitar neck and placing his fingers and showing him the first chord of All Right Now. You know, and the guys are saying 5 minutes. I'm going, this isn't happening.
Increasingly frustrated, Andy Fraser withdrew from the band for a second and final time. Desperate to honour their obligations to promoters and the record company, Free quickly called on the services of Tetsu and Rabbit again.
When they arrived, really, thinking back on it now, it was, although as much as I loved Rabbit and his playing, and it did add a lovely musical aspect to Free that we hadn't really had, I felt we were kind of pandering to Koss to try and keep him happy. Koss was gone. I mean, literally, his playing had deteriorated. But for some reason, we hoped that he would come through it. I mean, had I known about addiction then, what I know now, I knew we were on a losing wicket from day one with him. But we kept him on. We said, oh, he'll be all right. We'll just get in people he can play with.
In fact, Free were not effective, even with Kossoff. After the demise of the original Free lineup, Andy Fraser, Simon Kirke, Paul Rodgers, Paul Kossoff, even when they broke up and then they drafted me and Tetsu in, Free were gone then, because we didn't play like Free played as a four-piece.
To me, Andy Fraser was such a major part of that band. His bass playing and his songwriting was absolutely a key phenomenon for that band. For me, bringing those two guys in, both unbelievably good players, both brilliant at what they do, but they aren't Free. They might have played the songs and they probably played them note for note, but when it came to song composing and new stuff, it wouldn't have been the same.
The sound, you know, it was a lot more solid, a lot more heavy rock.
It was just different, and if anybody was a fan of early Free, they probably weren't a fan of what Rabbit did, even though what he did was very interesting and musically certainly legitimate.
This was the lineup which recorded the band's final album.
Now, you don't know if they called the last album Heartbreaker because they were all heartbroken at the way the band were really falling apart, but there's something painful in pain, I should say, in Rodgers' vocal delivery on Heartbreaker.
By the Heartbreaker record, Paul Kossoff was pretty bad. I mean, he was, you know, high all the time.
It was sad when Paul started getting sick, though, because the first thing anyone noticed was the vibrato going. It was very smooth when he was well, and sort of fast. You know, the way he vibrated the strings. But in the later days, it was sort of more wangy and slow, and he couldn't keep it going, kind of thing. And that was the first time that we knew that he was definitely affected and losing, you know, his way.
And as far as I'm aware, Kossoff didn't really feature a great deal in a lot of the songs. He would pop in and out of the studio between bouts of Mandrax, whatever he took.
I know, having interviewed Paul Rodgers, that he longed to be back with Paul Kossoff. That was his musical soulmate. they were great partners, like Daltrey and Townsend, Jagger Richards, Lennon McCartney, Marriott Lane from Small Faces. You had two guys that really locked in together, and they were better together than they were separately. Although there were some great songs. I mean, Wishing Well was a great song.
Great song. I think it's a really good song. I think towards the end, I think other things seemed to take over in Free, and I think that people didn't concentrate on the fact that they were still a great band. I think Wishing Well is a brilliant song. I think it's really, really well constructed, and it's a blinding vocal from Paul Rodgers. It's an amazing song.
Again, it's a rocker, and again, it's one of the best songs that Free ever came up with, but you can kind of hear the desolation that Rodgers and Kirke probably felt at the fact that Fraser wasn't with them anymore, and that Kossoff had gone off the rails way too far.
Wishing Well works as a single almost in a way that All Right Now did. It was mixed to be sort of single-oriented, to give it as much of the Free sound that they could, although it was different because there were different musicians in it. But it was sort of made to cater to Free fans. It's the only track off Heartbreaker that is even relative sounding to the original Free. And that's very slightly relative because the original Free had loads of space. Because of my keyboard work, I covered all those spaces. And sometimes that irritated Paul Rodgers, I think, because he's used to having those holes to throw his vocal in, like in the original version. But I think Andy Johns, who mixed Heartbreaker, did the best rendition of a Free song that he could without the original Free members. I'm not even quite sure if Paul Kossoff is playing on the American version of that.
On the track Wishing Well, that everybody says is Paul Kossoff because of that line, da-da-da-do, da-da-da-da, that's Snuffy Walden. That crushed Paul Kossoff. I think that, I mean, if he wasn't near total meltdown then, he saw that and it just destroyed him.
Kossoff finally had to give up the ghost as a live performer. And in Japan in 1972, Paul Rodgers stepped into the breach as both lead guitarist and vocalist.
I joined Free with Paul Kossoff, and he's not here, and it's too much to take. It's too sad. I don't feel like we're playing. I don't feel like that, even though I wasn't in the original Free, I don't even feel like I'm in the version of Free that I joined. This is totally something different, and it doesn't work. And I said, to be honest with you, I'm ready to quit and go home. So Simon sort of talked to me, and he said, we're all aware of it. There's nothing anyone can do about it. You just have to let it go.
The band finally called it a day for good sometime in mid-1973, leaving behind a frustrating legacy of what might have been.
When Free broke up, Paul started a band called Backstreet Crawler with me and some Texas mates. Free became Bad Company. Koss was gone by then anyway, but they wouldn't have taken Paul with them in the shape he was in. And we had a go at it. We tried our best to help him. We didn't pump him with dope. We threw dopers out of his room by the scruff of the neck in the hotels, physically. But he always managed to get it. So we couldn't we couldn't look after him. Crawler couldn't look after Paul any more than Free could.
1976, March the 19th. Sorry, I even remember the dates. We were on tour in, Bad Company was on tour, we were in New Orleans. And Peter Grant, our manager, called me in my room and said, I've got some bad news, Si. Paul Kossoff just died. And I wasn't surprised. He'd been on the edge for a long time. But I was very sad, because, shit, he was only 26, you know, a waste. Waste.
She stood in the street, smiling from my head to her feet. I said, hey, what is this, baby? Maybe she's in need of a kiss.
I think Free are rightly lauded as one of the great rock bands of the 70s because they were sort of more unique than a lot of the run-of-the-mill rock bands around, because they had that sort of sparsity of sound, and they were four genuine virtuosos at what they did.
The fact that those guys somehow found each other, I think that's really the magic of that whole period we're talking about. These people found each other, and I don't know how that happened. I mean, I don't know if that's fate or destiny, or you know so much exactly what you're looking for that you're just drawn to that, but it's just one of those time and places. I was just...
But there's something about a chemistry of personalities within music, within bands, where for a certain period of time a band can provide something of real depth and width and worth, and that's what Free did for a while.
I mean, they still stand the test of time. That you can put them on. I think you could put them on, and even if people didn't like rock music, at the end of the night, they wouldn't sit there and complain about, oh, do you have to play this music? It just goes down perfectly.
It'll be hard for anyone to find a band that has the simplicity. The writing and the performing was very, very special and unique. Free sound like no one else, and no one else could sound like Free.
But you know what? The legacy of Free can be heard today in so many different bands, from Pearl Jam to Guns N' Roses to Velvet Revolver. Any band that delivers an amazing, colossal, muscular rock and roll hook owes a big, big thanks to Free.
Baby, it's all right.